This is the justiceforveterans.uk One More Mission podcast. Today we hear from former Parachute Regiment Lieutenant Colonel Simon Barry talking about Kemi Badenoch in PMQs, the Northern Ireland Commissioners disquiet about the Legacy Act changes and what all this might mean for Ukraine and those older veterans.
Mr. Speaker, this is important because this isn't just about money. If the Prime Minister is deploying troops to Ukraine, those troops need to know that we have their backs. Yeah. Last week, 7 former SAS commanders, 7 former SAS commanders warned that Labour's Northern Ireland Troubles Bill will wreck our special forces. Yeah. Not me, that's the SAS. In November, 9 retired 4-star generals warned that his bill was a direct threat to national security. And even his own Northern Ireland Veterans Commissioner has said our veterans are being treated worse than terrorists. So, Mr. Speaker, is it not madness to be putting veterans in the dock for serving their country at the same time he is deploying today's soldiers into Ukraine?
That was Kemi Badenoch challenging Sir Keir at Prime Minister's Question Time. The Northern Ireland Veterans Commissioner she referred to was, of course, David Johnson, who later talked to Andrew Marr on LBC to explain exactly what the fundamental problem was.
The main concern that the veteran community, and indeed I think the armed forces community in general have, is that they don't see this Troubles Bill as fair and balanced. We could look at things like equivalency, things like coroner's inquests, the protections and safeguards. There just is a feeling that it isn't balanced, and it doesn't take into account the complex, difficult situation in Northern Ireland.
First off, Simon, what's your take on Kemi Badenoch's PMQs?
I was very impressed by the fact that she asked the question in the first place. And it's obviously up there on her list of major concerns, as well as from the political point of seeing it as a real vulnerability for this government, who is, quite clearly in the process of continuing on a line that is going to be more and more unpopular. So I think in terms of veterans, we're delighted that she raised it. We're delighted that she raised it so forcefully, and we're delighted that the way she raised it was also supported by so many people on her side of the House. I think that's very important, particularly when one compares the woeful performance from the other side of the House in the debate on the 18th of November. The other thing that's also interesting is that the Prime Minister, under parliamentary privilege, one must assume, continued to refer to the act as unlawful, and had been rejected by the courts, when we know that it is not unlawful. The very building that he's in, the existence thereof and the fact that it came out of that building and assembly makes it lawful by definition, and one would think that as a lawyer he ought to know that. And the other thing, of course, is that he mentioned the courts, and again, on a point of detail, he's wrong. It was one judge in one court, and he wasn't dealing with the whole act, just a number of bits inside it. And so in terms of the accuracy of the response, predictably poor, but in terms of it being raised by Kemi Badenoch, we try to be unpolitical, but if you're on our side, you're on our side. And if you're not, you're not. And that great Arab culture, my enemy's enemy is my friend, I'm afraid that's kind of where we are right now.
And then we had the Northern Ireland Veterans Commissioner, David Johnson, speaking to Andrew Marr on LBC. What's your take on what Johnson had to say?
I first met David Johnson again on the 18th of November, and I was very, very impressed with him. He's very committed. He's very balanced. He's very straight. He's an Ulsterman, and he understands the nuances of the sensitivities in Ulster and all the various political pressures probably better than anybody else I've spoken to recently, and certainly better than most people in government, civil service and so on, and probably in the MOD. And I know that David was really sort of wrestling with how he was going to deal with this, because although there are also veterans commissioners for Scotland and Wales, interestingly none for England, but is that David is very much on point. He's, I think, the youngest, the most dynamic, and probably the most plugged in, because he lives there. He deals with these people all the time. And I think his his view has changed, and then that came across in the interviews, from being let's try and work with this gang to try and get the best possible results, to it's not really working because they're not really listening. And I think that's what made him come up with that line that you are now treating terrorists better than you're treating veterans. That is born of hard work and frustrated ambitions to try and get the right thing done. And so I think where we've gone now is that someone like David, who has tried very hard to be well connected with government and so on for all the right reasons to get to the right answer. I think he's feeling frustrated that he isn't really being listened to, because a lot of people have made up their mind and they're going to fit this solution into the problem, however they need to sledgehammer it to do so. And I think we're all starting to come to the same conclusion, that the one area where, if there's got to be a compromise is, well, look, we'll sell the veterans down the river because then we'll then keep the Republic of Ireland on side. And so discussions that we've all had on this is that, frankly, there is no compromise solution that will be acceptable to both sides. By definition, if it is acceptable to the Republic and Sinn Féin IRA, it cannot be acceptable to veterans, because we will be the price that the government is paying. If it is acceptable to us, then it's not going to be acceptable to them. End of chat. They were both the opposition for 30 years. They're not going to confess their sins in public now. And so that's kind of where we are. And I think David knows that. I think he's tried very, very hard to really help the government along. And I feel that he's not really being listened to as much as he deserves to be. But we really appreciate his efforts, because more people like that standing up for the cause and speaking logically and sensibly from the right context is what we need.
It's interesting you're saying that, he's tried his best to try and help the government along. Lots of people have been in trying to help them along, but they just don't seem to be listening.
I think, as we sort of looked at before, this was in the government's electoral manifesto. Why it was in is of interest. It must be a political factor that is weighing into this decision. So why it was in there in the first place, and what it is they're trying to use this for. Is it purely for peace and tranquility in Northern Ireland, or is there another, maybe more sinister overview? And we've all seen the pictures of Hilary Benn and Simon Harris and all these other people, and tricolours and European flags. And that's the smiling faces they want everybody to see. But the price that they're prepared to pay in terms of who they actually sell down the river, and also the implicit condonation of deceit from both Sinn Féin IRA and indeed the Irish government, is another major concern that people should have. Where are our principles, and how far are we going to go to bending them in terms of our dealings with the Republic of Ireland and Sinn Féin IRA to get what exactly? What is this all about? The price we've got to pay, what's it for? And no one is being particularly honest. And so consequently, that information vacuum is filled by some fairly serious speculation that there's a lot more to do with this on the international stage than simply keeping a few people happy on the island of Ireland, and that if veterans are a price to pay for some bigger political prize as they perceive it, then tough luck, both veterans, turn to your right, you've done your duty, now just disappear, please.
So this, of course, sets a precedent in many ways. Can I ask you how old you are?
Yes, Rod, I'm 70, a youthful 70.
So you won't be going to Ukraine anytime soon?
Well, I mean, I would if I could, I'm sure. I'm sure there'd be a whole load of us who'd be prepared to stand up and do our duty one more time for something that's right. That's what we joined to do, and that's what we're happy to do.
The comments when you see stories about raising the age of the reservists, though, is that, yeah, we go, but what happens to us after?
Interesting. I think there's a number of strands in this. One, of course, is that it's easy to dick reservists. They're already proving that they can do that. So rather than call up some younger people who might not be very happy, you can call up a load of reservists who might not be very happy because you've already pissed them off. And so there's that sort of internal political thing. I think the other thing that's more worrying now, Why have you pissed them off? And the reason you pissed them off is why there would be a lot of guys now who would be slightly concerned about what the whole terms of reference of this deal are. When the Labour government sent the army to Northern Ireland in 1969, everything was clear. There was nothing outside Parliament and so on. That was Parliament's wish. Off we went. We had our rules of engagement, yellow card, no problem. Off we went. And now look at where we are. Take that into a context that is much, much more dangerous, not just physically, but in all the other aspects of an overall threat. We're dealing with the Russians. This is not Sinn Féin IRA South Armagh going around murdering farmers and their families and women and kids in Omagh and Enniskillen. This is one of the most ruthless military machines, ruthless to its own. Think what it's like to the opposition that the world has ever seen, and they've been really, really good at this. It's in their psyche. They will be there and they will use any form of weakness. And the fact that British soldiers are there worrying, and they will, upon the legal status, because it is not something that their country has said it wants to have full control over. It is happy to abrogate the responsibility for its soldiers' legal status to an extrajudicial or extraterritorial jurisdiction, which to most people on the street, the Clapham omnibus or any armoured personnel carrier, makes no sense whatsoever, is a worry. And that worry gnaws away at morale, at confidence. The commanders should know this when they're not towing the party line, that maskirovka, a Russian word that can describe only something that the Russians truly, viscerally understand, they will use that. They will exploit that. And there will be mistakes made, because there's mistakes made on every battlefield anywhere. I mean, just look at people in Kent not having any water. When things are moving fast and young soldiers are in areas of danger and things go wrong. You can end up with soldiers being exploited, kidnapped, captured, or whatever. And the ECHR being a pressure point for an interrogator, a brainwash operation, anything that can undermine the confidence of your enemy. It's great Sun Tzu, beat him before you have to fight him. If you can tell Tommy Atkins, actually, mate, guess what? The government sent you a bunch of charlatans because they haven't got your back. You've seen what they've done to veterans in Northern Ireland. You've seen that they've now said that the ECHR has control over you. Do you really think it's worth laying your life on the line? Don't worry, boys. If you sort of lay your weapons down, we'll leave you alone, walk past you, and we'll go on to Kiev, and we'll let you know when we get there. That's the sort of situation that they are creating. And the problem you get in Whitehall is that people craft these potential games of three-dimensional chess when they think they own the pieces, the rules, and the board upon which the game is being played. And in Eastern Europe, Russia, Ukraine, they own none of them apart from their own pieces. And so the way the game is played is beyond the ken of half these people, because they've never really understood the fundamental aspects of the enemy that they are fighting, because they're not like us, they are them. And so it is a big, big risk to have such a potential weakness, if you like, in the we've got your back, because actually you haven't. ECHR's got your back, Strasbourg's got your back, and if it wants to stick a knife in it for whatever reason, because a judge from Hungary has been lent on by somebody in Moscow, guess what? And we haven't seen anything addressing that at all from the government, apart from that gesture politics to keep Lord Hermer happy. It's not good enough. Lord Hermer is not going to be digging trenches in Ukraine. It might make his hands a bit sore. So, you're on your own, guys. And this situation is morally wrong. And all the government ministers saying, we've got your back, prove it. In my previous life, I spent quite a lot of time as a planner, contingency planning for things that may happen, and then hot planning for things that did happen. And the way things work there very much are, you are given your directive of policy from the government, and it comes from the Chief of the Defence Staff. It was called CDS's directive. And that would tell us, who were putting the operation together, what the desired end state is, what the exit strategy is, and the bones of the mission, from which we would then confirm the mission, develop the mission into tasks and so on. Now, we would also identify certain critical factors. It doesn't seem to me that anyone has actually come up with a desired end state that they want to be specific about, or there's enough speculation flying around in the press, and it would be helpful if that was laid out. And equally, now you're looking at calling people up to go and do this. Is there an exit strategy? Because so far, in the last couple of decades, our exit strategies have not been particularly good. And critical factors that are affecting it, obviously it's going to be a joint and allied coalition or whatever. But we can't all operate necessarily under the same national rules. And I doubt that the French will suborn anything that they do to some extraterritorial jurisdiction. And yet here we are looking at British soldiers being suborned to the jurisdiction of the European Court and a bunch of people in Strasbourg. And yet that is going to affect the achievement of the desired end state and exit strategy, which is from the British government. And that sort of split focus is not helpful to anybody, apart from being morally pretty shaky and frankly fundamentally wrong.
Map that process across to the Good Friday Agreement.
Well, there probably wasn't one of those there either. And indeed, that was when I was plying the trade, but obviously not in Ireland at the time. So there should have been, what's the immediate, things that we want done in a hurry. But then what's the long-term end state? And the long-term end state should have been an end to conflict. And the long-term end state as an end to conflict. Good Friday Agreement was signed, in the April, and 29 people had to be blown to pieces in Omagh the following August because we didn't manage an end to the conflict. In fact, the conflict spiked because Sinn Féin IRA didn't get what they wanted. And so with the complicity of the Republic of Ireland, mounted a very large and complex operation that had been put together in the Republic of Ireland and blew loads of people to pieces in Omagh because they wanted to get more concessions, which frankly just allowed the festering sore to continue to fester. But since then, they've had all that time now to do a bit of rewriting of history, and with help from useful idiots on all sides of the Atlantic and so on, who think drinking green beer makes them Irish and wonderful people. They haven't actually lanced the boil, and they have allowed this to go on. And it is in the interests of Sinn Féin IRA, and most certainly of the Republic of Ireland, to be seen as coming out of this whiter than white when their fingerprints are over the vast majority of terrorist killings. And so that rankles with the people who were the victims of those terrorist killings. And it's not just going to go away. So appeasing the IRA and appeasing the Republic of Ireland is not the way to build a lasting just peace in Northern Ireland, because it won't happen, because you have ignored the concerns of a very large part of people in the north and a very large part of people in mainland Britain, not just veterans, but those who were the victims of bombings that came through the Republic of Ireland, because they don't feel that it's actually finished. The people of Birmingham, the people of Warrington, Manchester, you can reel the list off. It hasn't closed for them. And what is being proposed will not give closure to them. In fact, it rubs salt in the wound. So the whole desired end state, coming back to the beginning here, isn't being achieved because it hasn't really been properly defined. It's more like the desired end state is keep the Republic happy, keep Sinn Féin happy, because the two are interlinked, and then use that to achieve something else and sort of no relevance to life in Northern Ireland at all.
That adds another dimension to the argument against ECHR and against changing the Legacy Act and so on. The situation at the moment, though, is that Sir Keir has done so many U-turns that he won't be in the mood to do another U-turn. That would suggest that we're in this for a long fight.
I agree, and I think we've all been sort of looking at the U-turns, and the U-turns are basically because either the policy was wrong in the first place, i.e. like this one, or because they've been pressurized by their own backbenchers against a policy which was arguably quite right, but their internal politics wouldn't let them. Where their backbenchers would feel in terms of a U-turn on this, I don't know. The ones that we had to listen to on the 18th of November were pretty lackluster, to be frank. So I think the difficulty is to be seen to be doing another U-turn. The optics politically may be something that Keir Starmer is worried about. But the counter argument to that, of course, is if you continue to let this run its course, it is now an open festering sore. It will become an even larger open festering sore, not just with Northern Ireland legacy, but now with deploying to Ukraine. And we discussed this months ago. No one seems to be listening, that more and more about this whole idea of the betrayal of your soldiers and your veterans and so on shows that there is a big constituency out there who feel that this is wrong, and it crosses party lines. And I would also say it crosses well into the red wall. So whilst presentationally we don't want another U-turn because it looks bad in the press and so on, in reality, if you don't do the right thing, and we're not asking for a U, it could be a J-turn, I really don't care. We're asking for you to do the right thing. How that comes across politically is yours to deal with, oh government, because you put yourselves there in the first place. But do the right thing. That's what you're expecting Tommy Atkins to do, with some form of infallibility 100% of the time. So try and get this one right and show us the way, please.
And of course, a lot of those seats are on thin margins. I mean, Louise Sanders-Jones only has like 1,700 votes lead in her constituency, and a lot of those constituencies are in the same boat. That, supporting the government might actually cost me my seat.
I mean, if you do the electoral arithmetic, then most of the sort of new crop of Labour MPs will be a one-term bunch of people, and they'll be out on their ears. Because if they continue to follow the party line, and the party is given the boot that it probably will get because it has thoroughly deserved it in most voters' eyes, that's when they can vote. Then those MPs will really have to look at how they are going to survive. And they won't survive by clinging to the party line, because the party is going down the drain. So the way that most smart politicians survive is by crossing the floor, ditching their principles, finding some others, standing up for something they've suddenly discovered. It was good enough for Winston Churchill, and I'm sure it'd be good enough for Louise Sanders-Jones, for instance, that she's got 1,700. Well, she's probably long lost that, so she's probably in a big deficit. Sticking to the party line won't help that deficit at all. But if she came out and took maybe a principled stand, saying, I've thought about this, maybe I got it wrong, and looking back at the people I soldiered with and blah, 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 this isn't the right thing. They weren't that naive after all, maybe. And I feel I've got to take a stand out of principle, bang, bang, bang. She might get more respect for that and more votes for that than clinging to something that really isn't working. I mean, it'd be interesting to see. I don't think she's alone either.
Thank you for your time, Simon. You have been listening to the One More Mission podcast. To keep up the facts around lawfare against people who did their duty and are now paying the price, visit justiceforveterans.uk.